In an industry where the standard operating procedure is the aggressive curation of flawlessness, STAYC occupies a distinct and somewhat contrarian position. They are not a group that succeeded despite their imperfections. They are a group that succeeded because they refused to monetize the illusion of perfection in the first place. While their contemporaries were meticulously crafting digital avatars and narratives of supernatural origin, STAYC presented a far more subversive concept: competence without mystery. When member Yoon openly acknowledged in 2024 that their recent releases had underperformed commercially, referring to them as flops, it was treated by observers as a startling breach of idol protocol. Yet this moment of candor was not a marketing mishap. It was the logical conclusion of a strategy that has always prioritized structural integrity over viral theatrics. The history of STAYC is not a story of an underdog rising to meet the industry standard, but of a structural realignment where authenticity was deployed not as a genre, but as a business model. The formation of the group was less an audition process and more a calculated withdrawal from the industry's star-making machinery. Black Eyed Pilseung, the production duo of Rado and Choi Kyu-sung, had spent years functioning as the architects of other people's dominance, crafting the sonic landscapes that defined groups like TWICE and soloists like Chungha. Their decision to launch their own venture was a pivot from service providers to owners. The 3-year search for members was not an exercise in finding the most talented performers, but a structural filter for stability. In an ecosystem often destabilized by the volatility of youth fame, the requirement for scandal-free members was a preemptive risk management strategy. They were not looking for the most explosive personalities, but the most durable ones. This marginalization of the typical star quality, the chaotic, unpredictable energy that defines many top acts, was intentional. They were building a container strong enough to hold their sonic ambitions, prioritizing reliability over the lightning-in-a-bottle volatility that characterizes many rookie groups. The debut period is often framed in narratives as a struggle for recognition, but in STAYC's case, the early friction was a necessary stress test of their foundational values. The release of So Bad in November 2020 was immediately met with plagiarism accusations regarding the visual similarities to Miley Cyrus's Midnight Sky, followed closely by a digital skirmish over their fandom name, Swith, which drew the ire of Stray Kids' existing fan base. For a group backed by producers of their caliber, these controversies could have been catastrophic. However, the marginalization phase they endured was not a failure of launch, but a demonstration of their distinct market position. They did not have the protective cushion of a Big Four agency to absorb these blows. They had to absorb them through the density of their own production. The plagiarism scandal, rather than burying them, forced an immediate transparency that bypassed the typical PR deflection. The industry constraints of the pandemic, which limited physical interaction, further stripped away the non-musical elements of idol promotion, leaving STAYC with only their sound and their unpolished reality. They were forced to compete on the merits of their compositions in a digital landscape that is often unforgiving to noise. This period of pressure served as a qualification for their later authority. The criticism that So Bad was noisy or experimental was actually a signal of their competitive advantage. They were introducing a sonic density, the teen fresh sound, that the market had not yet learned to categorize. While other groups were smoothing out their edges to appeal to algorithmic playlists, STAYC was leaning into a retro-futuristic complexity that demanded attention rather than passive consumption. The transition from the friction of So Bad to the explosion of AC in April 2021 was not a pivot, but a refinement of the same structural logic. ASAP did not succeed because it abandoned their identity. It succeeded because the public had finally been trained by the previous months of exposure to understand their syntax. The 20 million views accumulated in 9 days were not an accident of virality, but the result of strategic patience. They had allowed the market to catch up to them, rather than chasing the market. As their commercial position solidified with Stereotype and subsequent hits like Run to You, the group revealed that their scandal-free branding did not equate to compliance. The industry standard for idols, particularly younger ones, is a passive acceptance of promotional duties regardless of the context. The controversy involving Yoon's refusal to perform for military personnel at age 17 due to discomfort was a pivotal moment where the group's internal logic superseded industry expectation. In a culture that often demands performative patriotism and gratitude from celebrities, the decision to support a minor member's boundary was a high-risk maneuver. It signaled that their realness was not a marketing slogan, but an operational protocol. This resistance to the total commodification of the artist's personhood differentiated them from the perfect idols who often burn out under the weight of unending obligation. By protecting the member over the opportunity, they purchased long-term loyalty from their fan base at the cost of short-term controversy, a trade that only entities confident in their longevity are willing to make. The breakpoint in their trajectory, the moment the system could no longer contain them, arrived not with a single music show win, but with the candid admission of failure in 2024. When Yoon stated that their recent albums had flopped, it served as the ultimate confirmation of their authority. In an industry governed by the preservation of face, only a group with an unassailable foundation of trust can survive such an admission. The numbers, the chart positions, the Circle Chart #1 albums, the Oricon rankings, serve not as proof of their worth, but as confirmation of an argument they had been making since debut, that the audience is capable of processing reality. The success of tracks like Teddy Bear and Bubble demonstrated that they could navigate the mainstream without losing the sonic idiosyncrasies that defined them. They did not need to maintain an illusion of constant victory to retain their relevance. They simply needed to continue producing high-level work. The legacy of STAYC is not one of disrupting the industry through innovation or shock, but of expanding the industry's parameters to accommodate a more durable form of stardom. They proved that the Big Four monopoly on success is not absolute if the production quality and artistic intent are sufficient to bypass traditional gatekeepers. Their success represents a strategic excellence that is often overlooked in favor of narratives about luck or timing. They did not arrive at their position by accident. They arrived by consistently refusing the industry's demand for artificiality. By treating their audience as adults capable of handling nuance, controversy, and honesty, they built a fandom that is invested in the people rather than the persona. This sets a precedent for how legacy act can evolve, not by fracturing under the pressure of maintaining a flawless image, but by leaning into the cracks and letting the light show through. STAYC did not disrupt the structure. They strengthened it by proving that the foundation of pop music can be reality, provided the reality is compelling enough.